Okay, so let's start for the presentation today. It's probably not going to be very long, but we had an idea to present GitHub before we present Git. So let's see how this goes. Uh, who here heard about GitHub before? Okay, who has a GitHub account? Okay, most people have a GitHub account. Okay. So GitHub, what is GitHub? The initial purpose for GitHub was, and that's also how they sell this product. It's built for developers. So it's something for you to manage source code, to version things, to collaborate with other people. But GitHub adds a lot of other functionality around just the version control parts that are also very useful. So I will sign in with my account here, which might be a bit scary because there's a lot of stuff there, but I don't have an empty account to use at the moment. And also I have two-factor authentication on GitHub, which is another thing that you might want to set up at some point, but not today. Okay, so the first time you log into GitHub, when you create an account, if you don't have one, it's going to be way more empty than this one, because this one has a lot of stuff that I do with GitHub. But the main idea of GitHub is that you can have your own repositories. You can think of a repository as like one project, like you would have one repository per project, or you can also think about like many projects share one repository. I usually try to do like one project per repository because it's easier to map stuff and keep track of what's happening. But especially like in large companies, like for example, Google or Facebook, they have something that's called the monorepo, where they only have one repository for all the code in the company, and everything is inside the same repository, and that's millions of lines of code. So luckily, we don't have millions of lines of code to manage, so our repos are going to be small. So when you first get into GitHub, there is a button here on the side. It's called New, where you can create new repositories, or you can also come here on the plus sign on the corner. And the plus sign has some other options, which can be very interesting. So the first one is to create a repository, which is the kind of default way of using GitHub. You can import a repository. Importing a repository means you get a project from some other source, like for example, Bitbucket or some other sites that also have version control. But you can also use this to create a repository from a template. But let's go over that later. The third one is a new gist. Gist is kind of a very small repo. It's a repo with one document. So gists are very nice for putting, when you need to take note of something, or like you have one small script that you want to share with people, but you don't want to have like a full repository with a lot of stuff. You can come here and then write down like a file name and then put the script here. I'll use an example here. This is something that I shared with Taylor some time ago. So it's just one Python script. It has some code, but it's not very long. And the nice thing is that since you have this here, people can also comment or like ask for new features or complain if there's something that's not working properly. This one doesn't have any interaction, but it's very common to find gists around the web, like for explaining, oh, how do you install something in your computer? And then people interacting and trying to figure out how to do stuff. Yeah, I just clicked on all here, and there are, I think this is all that's being created, but just nice for taking short notes when you don't want the full repo. New organization, it's when you're interacting with GitHub, the default is you're interacting with your username, but you can also create an organization to contain a lot of repositories. So for example, our lab has an organization, which is the DibLab. And this has a lot of repositories that we have in the lab. So we have some repositories which are software that are being developed. There's a lot of, you shouldn't be seeing all the private ones here because I'm an admin on the, so I'm seeing all the GGG 201B repos that are showing up. But this is a place that you can have like one organization sharing a lot of different repositories. But the default is for each person to have their own username and their own area and their own repository. So we can talk later about how GitHub supporting ICE, but that shouldn't be the point now. So these are my repositories for my account, but I also have access to repositories from the lab, for example, and other things. And this is the GitHub profile that lists everything that you have access and what you're doing and so on, which is fun sometimes. If you find someone that's commenting on your stuff, you can go look into what they are doing and see more background about the person you're interacting with. But that's all kind of details. Let's start a new repository. So when you create a new repository, the kind of default interface is this one, where you can give a name for your repo. If you don't have a good name to give, GitHub tries to suggest some random name. Symmetrical invention sounds like a great name for a repository. Trying out GitHub interface. And the description is optional, but it's always useful to have this both for other people that are coming and seeing your repository, but also for yourself in a year when you try to figure out why the hell you created a repository. And then there are two options here. One of them is public. So anything that you add to this repository, any person can view. The other one is private. I think nowadays by default, GitHub will have you have private repositories, but we can also get a lot of access to GitHub features because we are in a university, and we'll go through that later. The only detail is that if you have a private repository in your personal account, I think you can share with 3 people this. So it's not a very good tool for collaborating if you have a lot of people to collaborate to make this private. But again, there are ways of doing that. And also GitHub, that's how GitHub makes money. They sell you access to some more advanced features, like having private repositories for unlimited number of people collaborating. So, but for now, we'll make this public because there will not be anything private here. And then there are some other options that are useful. For example, a README is a file that lives in your repository, and it's going to be shown in the, let me go through a repository that has a README already. Sour mesh, yes. Yeah, that's not how you spell sour mesh. GitHub is also has this funny things. When you type something wrong, it's going to say 404, this page is not looking for, and it kind of moves. So, okay, sour mesh. So this is the software that I work in the lab, and the README file, there's a lot of files here. This is the README file. So it's what gets shown by default on the repository. And a README is a good place to put information about your project. So for someone that's coming at the first time to see like what this is about, if it's a piece of software, how do you install it, how do you use it, and so on. And this is this file, readme.md, that gets shown there. And when you're creating a new, not a new gist, not this one, here. When you're creating a new repository, GitHub can also give you like a default README to get you started writing more details about your project. And the other two things that it recommends is a git ignore file, which is useful when you're developing software because there are some things that you don't want to version control, like files that get regenerated all the time. If you're doing an analysis pipeline, you might put on your git ignore, for example, all your raw data, because you don't want to put your raw data on GitHub because GitHub doesn't support very large files. And if you're working with genomics, probably your sequencing files have gigs or more than that. So that's something that you can add to your git ignore. I'll keep it as none for now. And finally, there is the license. So licenses are complicated, but just because you put some code on GitHub doesn't mean that anyone can come and use it. So especially for software, it's important to put a license to tell people like, how can you use this piece of software? But they are these first ones are very software focused. There are some for documentation or like for lessons that you can also use, like the Creative Commons licenses. And if you're confused with this, and it's normal to be confused, you can leave as none and figure out, like, as you learn more about license, you can set the license later. But there is a button with information here that goes to this website called Choose a License that tries to guide you through how you choose a license for your code or for your materials and so on. Yeah, so for example, my project is on software, like what can I use? Documentation, and so on. In my case, I lost the thing I was writing. Great, I lost the name. No, the name is here. None. I will put a PSD3 clause license, whatever, just to show what gets added to repository. And finally, in this case, I have this other thing here that I can give access. I will leave it like this because, like, if it's a new account, you won't have that, and we can go through that later if we have time. But so when you create a repository, that's the interface that GitHub presents for a repo. It's empty, doesn't have much, but you can see that it already has a readme.md file and has a license because I selected the license back there. The nice thing about having the license here is that it has the information, like what you can do, what you can do with this piece of software. And also at some point it will be added here on top, like what's those details, which is useful when you're going through a repo to figure right at the beginning what you can or can't do with that piece of software. And there are a bunch of other things here on top for GitHub. So the first one I'm going to show this is the wiki, where it's a place that you can take notes about your project, but not necessarily keep in version control as code. So this is a very nice way of kind of keeping the knowledge around a project together with all the other parts. So if you have an analysis pipeline, you can use the wiki, for example, for taking notes and for as you progress along to add more information or keeping notes for yourself to go back later. And well, you can add here like this is our presentation format, and then you can save the page. And so as you come here, you click in wiki, you have like a home page and it lists the pages that you have on the site. So you can go adding information here as needed. And this is kind of separate from the code part. So the code doesn't show anything about the wiki. So it's also a nice way if you want to split both things. Okay, now it's showing the license here. The other thing that you can do with GitHub is there is this tab here called issues. And this is useful when you're collaborating with other people and they can kind of have a conversation with you through the issues. And it's also, if you're maintaining software, it's like, it's an entry point for people to say like, oh, I'm confused with this problem that I'm having with your software or with running your pipeline, and they can ask questions here. So for example, when you open an issue, it will ask you a title and for you to give some explanation on what's the problem that you're having. So just found these repos, seems kind of empty. When are you going to add some content? Okay, and you can post an issue and it's going to show here, and then you can interact with the person that posted the issue. This is a very bad example of an issue that you would open in other people's repositories because you don't have any skin in the game and you're going there and complaining about the work that people is doing. So when you're interacting with other people on the internet, try to be nice and not be crappy and keep pointing out about problems that people have. So, and if this is your repository, you can well, you can sort of always answer, but you can take some additional actions on an issue. So for example, one thing that's useful is that they have some pre-assembled labels here that you can put on issues. So for example, you can start saying, okay, is this a bug? Is this like someone asking for documentation improvements? Or is this a duplicate from another issue that's already in the repo? So this is useful because that's also aggressive to say that something is invalid. Okay, I'll put this as a question. So what happens is that now this issue has a label. And if you have many issues in your repository, it's very nice to filter down by clicking in these labels and seeing what are the different things that are around. So for example, I'll go into Sour Mesh because we have 215 issues there. There are a bunch here that don't have labels. So because from time to time we go and label a lot of stuff, but it's not always that they all have labels. But for example, these ones down here, they have like the doc and the enhancement labels. If I click on doc, I can see that there are some other issues that are open and have this label. So if you're feeling like tackling the label, like the documentation on your project, you can click here and then drill down and find the problems and go along. So let's try to deal with that issue that someone came and commented and said that we don't have enough content. So how do you add content to this thing on GitHub? There are some ways. There are some buttons here that can help get you started. So you can create new file, upload files, or find file. So let's create a new file here. And it's going to be in your repository, and it's going to ask you what's the name of the file that you want to add here. So let's add the file called, I don't know, contributing.md. So this is going to be a markdown file because of this, the extension pointing to that. And we will create how to contribute to this repository. We accept contributions. Welcome. You can send a pull requests. Yada yada yada. Not keep writing much here, but just to show the interface. So on GitHub, you can add new files to your repository, and use this simple editor to edit the things you need. Because this is a markdown file, you can also preview the file and see like how the formatting is going to be. And this is markdown, just like we saw with our markdown and Jupyter notebooks last week. So what you can do, the markdown parts that you can do, those two are going to work here just as well. And if you go down, there is this new thing called commit new file. So it gives you kind of a default message here, like create contributing.md, which is a fine message. I'm not going to change that. And you can also add like an extended description of what you're doing. And then there are two options here, which are commit directly to master branch or create a new branch. We will not worry about branches now. So we are going to commit new file. In version control terms, committing a file or committing something means creating kind of a snapshot of like in the history of something. So for example, we just created this file, so we have one snapshot. And then as we add new changes, we'll do another commit and create another version, and so on and so on. So for example, now we have 3 different files here. We have our contributing.md file. We can see that it's showing here two commits on the interface. If we click here, we have access to all the history of everything that happened in this repository. And you can also go back to like previous versions of this repository. So for example, if I click, so if I click on this one, which says browse the repository at this point in history, it will show me the initial version of the repo without the contributing.md file. But if I click here on 3, I can go back to master, which is the default and the current version. And then it shows back the contributing.md file that we created. The other thing you can do on the GitHub interface is that you can click on a file. So for example, our contributing file, and there is like these 3 buttons here. The raw one is very useful when you're interacting with a remote computer, for example, farm or a cluster or something like that. Because if you click on raw and you copy this URL, you can download this very easily from other computers. So I didn't open a terminal. Let's open. Where is my terminal? System tools. So I changed. Well, I don't need to go into farm. I can do this on my computer. So I can run wget with that URL here. And then I have a local copy of the file. So this is very useful when you have just one script that you want to take off the repository and put on a remote computer. It's something you can do. You can click on raw and get the direct link for something. You can also right click and copy the link instead of downloading directly. There's also the history button, which will show all the commits that are relevant to this file. And as you pile up more changes, not all commits will touch every file in your repository. So this is a nice way of seeing like how specific parts of your repo change over time. And finally, there is the middle button that's called blame, which is kind of also aggressive. But if you try to find out who did something in a file, you can go to the blame button and see like who changed what line in the code. As an example, let's go to Sour Mesh and grab one file that changes a lot. Like, okay, I know one that changes a lot. This one changes a lot. So if I click on the blame, well, there's only 2 people changing stuff here. But like there are, like the pink one is me, the other one is Titus. So for example, this line we both changed at some point ago. And like you can see exactly who changed what line and what version of the code it was changed. So this file was not very useful because only 2 people changed. I think this one has more people, 3 people. So you could go to the blame and see who changed what. But anyway, that it's useful sometimes, not terribly useful, but good to know that it's there. Finally, going back to the contributing button, there are two other ones here. This one is for removing the file from the repo, which I don't want to do, so I won't click it, but it would create a new commit removing the file. Or, that was too fast. I clicked on this pencil that lets you edit this file. And then again, we'll go back to that text interface, and now we can add more notes here. Or maybe subsection. And then same thing. This time the default message is going to be update instead of create. But these default messages are not very good when you're going through the history of something, because like create, update, update, update doesn't tell you much about what's happening. So you can add some things like add a new subsection to contributing. And if this is a very small change, but if you have big changes and you need to tell other people what's happening, you can also write more here and say like, why did you change this? And what are the consequences of changing this file? We'll commit again. And now if we look at the history of our repository, we have 3 commits this time. The other way of interacting with the GitHub interface for managing files is that you can upload new files. So for example, if you created an R Markdown document or a Jupyter notebook, you can use this interface to drag some files here and upload to your repository. Or you can also select a random file from your computer. What do I have here that I can upload? It's not. Okay, I have a snake file from a previous tutorial, and I'm going to upload that. So it's showing here that this was uploaded. And again, it's asking you to commit a change. And the default message is not very useful. Add files via upload is very generic. So I will say add snake file from previous lesson. Showing upload features on GitHub UI. And then it's going to process my file. And if I look now, I have a file here that I didn't edit through the GitHub interface, but I can still go inside and look at the file and what I did before. So what else do we have? Pull requests. So pull requests is something that's useful when you have more people collaborating in the software, because the GitHub repo, something nice that you can do on GitHub is that you can fork a repository and do your own changes to it. So there is this button here on the corner. It's called fork. And I can go, I need to put in another place. Where do I put this? Because I created this repository, when I fork, I can put on my account. So I'm going to put this on DibLab and then remove later. I hope people will not get confused with what's happening. But now, if you look at the previous, on my initial repository, it was my username and the name of the repo. Now, because I created this fork, of the original repository, it will say this in this organization, this repo was forked from that previous one. So now we have kind of a parallel repository that both of them started from the same point, but you can go here and do your own changes to the code. So for example, I can come here and create a new file and say, I wanna call this my contribution. And my awesome contributions repo. And then I can create this new file in my copy of the repository. So in this one, which is the diblab one, we have this my contribution.md file. If we look at the original repository, it doesn't have that file. So this is also useful if you have like a template for starting some analysis. People can go and fork your repository and add their own data, their own analysis, and do their own changes to the repo. Finally, if there is something that you're doing on your repo and you want to contribute back to the original one, consider that there is a new button here, well, not a button, but like a new line on the interface that's saying this branch is one commit ahead of Luis Herber master. What this means, and you can go to pull request or compare. So let's go to compare first. So what this is saying is that when we compare our version of the repository with the original one, these are the changes that are between both of them. And it's saying like, there is one change file with one addition, one deletion. So there is this extra my contribution.md file. And if I want to contribute this file back to the original one, there is this green button here saying create pull request. So when I create a pull request, now is you interacting with another project. And a pull request is you saying, I have this set of changes to the original project that I want to submit. And then it's up to the original project to accept them or ask you for some changes or how to adapt or improve your submission if there are problems. So I'm adding my contribution. Hopefully it's useful. And then when you create the create pull requests button here, what's going to happen is that now it's showing back the original repository. I'll go back to the code here for a second. So like we had before the issues, that we have one issue here. Now the pull request has a small 1 on the side saying that we have one new pull request. And I can go here now and see, oh, I have a pull request. Like let's see what was added, what changed. So okay, creates my contribution. I'm adding my contribution. Hopefully it's useful. And there are these tabs here on the top. The most important one here is the files changed, because you can go and see exactly what changed, what was added, or what was removed in this pull request that asking to put back. Again, this is a simple example. I can totally show some gnarly example of a pull request. So again, Sour Mesh has 31 open pull requests at the moment. And let's see, I don't think there's any. Okay, so since there are so many, there are 31 open and 330 closed pull requests. I'll go to one of the closed pull requests to see what an interaction looks like. So for example, this one. So this pull request is a pull request that Tidus open on the repository. It's saying fixes 883, which will go there in a second, by naming signatures in blah, 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 blah. So this is sort of trying to explain like why I'm submitting this change, what people should pay attention when they are reviewing to see if it's a good change and so on. And this syntax here is how GitHub refers back to issues and another pull requests. So for example, in this case, there is a sour mesh issue that Taylor opened that's describing a problem with sour mesh and explaining what's the problem, how she found out, and how to reproduce the problem, and so on. So what Titus did is that he's saying like, okay, this is fixed on that pull request 884. So you can see that the issue is pointing to the pull request, and the pull request is pointing to the issue. So GitHub is nice because it helps you keep track of what's happening through a project. And also there is some discussions here, like some other comments. And then you can also interact with other people. They can ask more questions and clarify what's happening. This is me. And in this case, since Titus submitted the pull request, I approved the changes. And so this can be merged back into sour mesh. This is a complicated case. Let's go back to our simple case. I forgot to show the file changes. So the file changes here, there are 29 new lines of changes, and one was removed. So this red one was removed. The green one was added, and these are the changes, like it changed the name of from name to MD5 sum. And then there are some other code that was added down here. But that's the interface showing like what are the changes that are being applied to your repository. In our case, it's very simple. There's only one extra line. And so I can go here and say, okay, I like this change. So I can merge this pull request into the original repository. So I can click here. And from now on, if I go to the code now, this one has my contribution that came from another repository. What else? Question. That was a lot of information for people that never saw GitHub. But yes.
When you see the report being on GitHub, does whoever writes it or owns it, they set their conditions that you can fork the code?
Yeah. So.
Because you own the code. You own the code or own the file you fork.
Yeah. So this is something that's important with licenses on GitHub, because by default, like the default interface on GitHub will let you fork anything, but not necessarily because you forked and now you have your copy, you have rights to do something on the code. So like if you want to contribute changes back, you might need to like follow. Usually big companies, for example, they ask you to your copyright assignment or something like that. So there are some rules there on how to use. But by default, I'm not sure if you can disable forks on GitHub. I don't think you can. There are some configurations here. Let's see. Projects. Yeah, no, you can disable forks. Yep, nope. So by default, like the fork button will be there, and it can go. That's that.
Yeah.
But again, forking doesn't, just because someone forked your project and they send pull request doesn't mean that you need to accept the changes. Like it's your project, it's your thing. Like
yeah.
Even if someone go do something else. And then gets back to the license, because the license might not allow you to do something different. But what else? Wiki. I'll not go into actions. They are cool, but so yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, find file here is useful because we don't have many files here. Yeah. Yeah, and as you start typing, it will reduce the list. So I can put like I. no file starts with I. Okay, L, and then you have one. It's especially useful with, again, big repos, because this one, if I do the find file, it's going to show a lot of stuff. So I can type source main hash. And in this, the find files is kind of smart here. It will try to match parts of the file. So you can see I typed src main hash all together, but it's finding 3 different files that have like different parts of the content. So this is useful for like going fast into a specific file. And I think there's a bunch of keyboard shortcuts that you can use. I think, yeah. So T on the keyboard will open this interface if you don't want to go and click on the button. The other thing I was going to go through here was the settings page. So if you own a repository, you will have access to this, and there are a lot of configurations that you can make about the repo and like what's available, what can be used in the repo. So for example, if you don't want to have wikis, or you don't want to like random people coming and editing the wiki, you can restrict these things here. You can also remove issues, or you can ask for sponsorships on GitHub. So for example, people can donate money to you through the repositories or for a project. Yeah, the others are more details, but you can also do like, there are the dangerous ones here. You can make a repo private if it's public, or you can make it public if it's private. You can transfer the repository to another person, or you can archive. Archive is good when you have something that you don't work like for 5 years, and you can tell people like, don't even bother sending any new comments or things here because it's archived, it's not being maintained. And you can also delete the repository, which I need to do with the deep lab one later. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do with GitHub, but we won't have time to go into too many details today. Yeah, and the other thing that might be useful is that you can start repositories on GitHub. So for example, if I click here on start, I can go to my profile later and see like my stars. So as you find repos around GitHub that are useful, you can keep a list of the things that you want to save to remember for later. And also something you can do is that you can go to, like I'll go to another repository here, which is one that I contributed recently, and you can watch a repository. So watching a repository means that like any conversation, like any new issue that shows up, any pull requests, any commits don't show up by default, but like new software releases and this sort of stuff, you'll get a notification of changes in that place. So this is also nice, like if you have a piece of software that you use in your data analysis pipeline and you want to know about new features or things that are changed, you can watch the repo on GitHub, if they have a GitHub repository, to see what's happening on the project. And then if you have notifications, there is a small bell here on top that will show like all the notifications that are showing up. I do have a lot of notifications, but besides the point. The other thing that's useful on the GitHub interface is that there are some shortcuts here on top. So like this is for all the pull requests that you open or you interacted. So this is nice to keep track of, like, oh, maybe I'm on a project that they assign an issue or a pull request to me, so I can go and see what was assigned, or like if I was mentioned in something or someone requested reviews for something. Yeah, this I need to answer this person. And same thing with issues, kind of the same interface. But this is nice when you have a lot of things and a lot of different projects. So trying to figure out what's happening with all those projects, or if there's something that you need to focus on doing. Or what else? I think that's kind of it to get started with GitHub. For next week, what we are going to do is that we are going to do a Git tutorial. So this is GitHub. This is the interface for doing issues and pull requests and managing the project. Git is the thing that you can use on the command line for committing changes and doing all these things without having to come to the interface. So see you next week for more. And if there's any other questions also.